Welcome to the attendees. It's a pleasure to have you all online with us today. I can see there's a growing number of people in the room, so we'll just wait until that attendee list and everybody's been invited in. I think you're in some kind of a holding room, and it looks like everybody's joining us now. So we will get started. I just want to make sure this is recording, which it is. Fantastic. So welcome everybody. We're all very happy to have you here with us virtually today. This is something that I don't think we've done before, but it's something that we thought would be very useful ordinarily and also in these unusual circumstances that we're in, which is to give potential executive MBA and MBA students a glimpse into the inner workings of the Katruli program by getting the opportunity to meet some of the faculty and not only having the opportunity to hear from the faculty, but also to ask any questions that you might have. So I wanted to introduce myself. I'm the Associate Dean at Katruli. My name is Professor Anthony Evans, and I teach the Managerial Economics course and have done for over 10 years. What we'll do is we will explain a little bit about why enrolling on an MBA program is such a good idea ordinarily, and especially under the circumstances that we're in right now, some of the opportunities that come through that and some of the experiences that you'd have. What I'll do first of all is I'll just go around the table so that I can make sure that everybody's familiar with which faculty we have with us today. So I'll call on each faculty member just to introduce themselves briefly. We'll then have some more in-depth questions. So I've got some questions that I'll be asking faculty relating to their specific areas of expertise. And then we'll also have a little deep dive into everybody's individual courses so that you can learn a little bit more about what you would learn on those courses and the importance of those modules. Then we'll finish up with some open Q&A and some administrative announcements as well. So if we come around the group and people can introduce themselves, if I come to Terence first, could you just say a few words, Terence, just to introduce yourself to our guests today?
Hello, everyone. Hello. Thank you very much, Anthony. Hello, my name is Terence T. And I think I've been with Katruli for 8 years at the very, very least. So I can't even remember. I've been long part of this like a wonderful, wonderful family. I teach like the EMBA, 2 courses, financial management, as well as advanced finance. I'll pass it on to Chris, I guess.
Okay, hi. Hello, everybody. My name is Chris Dalton, and it's funny that you should say you can't quite remember how many years you've been working with Katruli, because I also had the same memory problem trying to work out when was the first year, and I think it's about 6 or 7 years. I might need to be corrected. I teach the Foundations of Management module, which on the MBA program is the first, it's the introduction, it's the first contact on the program.
Thank you. And then finally, Nicholas, can we just hear from you in the modules that you teach?
Sure. Hi everyone. Hi, Anthony. It seems, guys, that the only good memory here, it's me, because I do remember when I started with the school, it was around late 2009. So it's been more than 10 years now. What I teach is, depending on the year and on the programs of the school, I teach either strategic management or marketing management, and eventually closing usually the executive MBA program with a simulation game in which we put all the concepts together. So that's pretty much it.
Thank you. So what you see there is you've got a range of professors from a number of different modules across the program, and also I think from different periods of the program. So Chris is obviously up first with the Foundations of Management. That's one of the first modules. My Managerial Economics course comes typically at the very beginning of the program. Terence and Nicholas, whenabouts are your modules in the program? Are they more in the middle or towards the end?
40% of the way, usually for financial management, and advanced finance about 80% of the way.
Okay. In my case, usually strategic management comes a bit earlier than the marketing management.
Ah, okay.
So we all have the benefit of getting there quite early, which is always nice. I find it quite good to get students early because you get to set some of the expectations. But then this year was the first time where I've taught a module at the end of the, later on in the program as well, where I've been teaching a PSDM course. And that was this is the first year where I've actually had two different modules. So it was very nice to see students not only at the beginning of the programs, but also during them as well. So hopefully now you understand a little bit about who we are and the courses that we teach. Maybe if I could ask some of our faculty here to just answer a few questions relating to MBA programs a bit more generally. Maybe if I could come to Nicholas first. If you could just tell us a little bit about why MBA programs, why you feel that they're important, what you think some of the key skills are that they develop, and why modern business professionals benefit so much from MBA programs.
Well, let me summarize my ideas on telling you and the audience that, to me, MBA programs are like like Coca-Cola. You know, they've been there for years and years. They are the most popular programs business schools have, and every since and then people claim that they're going to die, and they keep selling and selling and selling. I think the most important aspect is giving people, business professionals and non-business people, actually, like people coming from engineering or doctors or whatever the profession, the chance to see in a very comprehensive and synchronized way how all functional areas of a company actually can add value to the organization to make it sustainable in the long term, and gives also a couple of other things beyond the academic side of it, which is networking opportunities. And I find that particularly one of the most interesting aspects of an MBA program. I mean, you get the chance not just to interact closely, which is the case in our school, with the faculty, that you can reach out later, because that's the beauty, I would say, of our school relative to other schools out there, that you can really get in touch with the professors later and get advice and move your business forward. But also the fact that you can interact and network with a lot of interesting colleagues. I mean, the top people in top positions in the region where you actually run businesses, and that's an amazing asset that you can have for the rest of your career. So I would say, academically speaking, very strong. You get to understand how to use tools and frameworks and how to apply things in your career and in your business, but also the social aspect of it, which is networking. I would summarize these two as the main skills. I don't know how you see it, guys.
I'd agree with that. When I talk to people, business leaders, one of the typical complaints or criticisms they might have of some of the people that they work alongside is the lacking of a kind of a strategic overarching picture. So some of the people that are maybe seeking promotions, one of the big problems with their careers is that they will be seeking a promotion, but they're not quite looking at a business in a coherent picture. They're very focused on their individual expertise and their individual department that they've come through. And what they really need to find is a way in which they can convince their superiors that they can see across the entire business. And of course, the purpose of an MBA is that you get to really understand all of the different business units so that you can take that broader picture. It's also
the other good thing, the other good thing that we do in the program, by the way, related to what you're mentioning, Anthony, is the fact that people go through the different functional areas. I mean, with the courses that we take, like finance from your case, or Terence, and decision making and marketing and whatever, supply chain. But then we also integrate the concepts in certain courses, like in the final project that probably going to talk about, and also this simulation game that we play, in which people have to make decisions and coordinating all functional areas. So exactly going along with your comment on that.
I also I don't know if Terence, you have an experience of this, where you have some students that come in from a very tightly defined functional area. So maybe they work in the finance department of their organization. And so when they approach their finance module, they maybe have a slightly different mindset to when they're approaching a different module in terms of their existing expertise. But I think you'd probably collaborate the idea that in those modules, you certainly test them and make them even see their own discipline and their functional area in a very different way.
No, I agree with you. I mean, this happens quite often. So there are, inevitably, you would have some finance function people who who will be joining the program. And the way, at least, the course is designed for both the finance course, but for both my finance courses, is that, if you're a starter, you would be able to actually quickly absorb a lot of the tools and techniques, that people actually use in the daily life. But for those people who are actually a lot more advanced, there are certain challenges that they realize that, I'm actually not, I'm strong with concepts, but when it comes to really actually putting it in use on spreadsheet, I struggle. And so it happens all the time. And there are little loose ends that you almost have to helping them to tie it up, say, I never thought about it this way, or I never thought that there is a difference between, these two smaller concepts, the overarching function, they actually understand. So it happens quite often. One thing I would like to actually draw back to, when what Nicholas and you were saying, Anthony, was that I think one of the there are a couple of reasons why we at least three of us cannot actually remember how long we have been with the school, with Nicholas being he knows, but he has been around for a long time, and I think we have been for a long time simply because we do actually enjoy teaching at this place, and also the fact that because we are all have been working with on the very different subjects for so long, we actually know who is teaching what and what they will be covering. So from your program, from your course, Anthony, I know what cases you're actually using, and I'll draw it, draw the opportunity cost, for instance, and then I put it into my my syllabus, and then I'll feed it off to Nicholas and say, listen, by the time you actually get to the strategy part, you will see why and how it is actually connected. The finance stuff that we're looking at is how it is actually connected to the strategy part, to the strategy, to the strategic thinking. So there is, a very nicely, I don't know how, by design or by coincidence, but there is a very nice natural flow, that a thread that actually links us together.
Indeed. Well, maybe I'll stay with you, Terence, now, because I think this follows on quite nicely to. So obviously the Cutrulli model, all of the different professors, the instructors on the courses typically have jobs based at other institutions. And so I think you're quite right to point out that what could be perceived as a challenge in terms of generating continuity between different modules, because we're not physically all located in the same office space or whatnot, can actually be somewhat of a strength, because for many of us that have been at Cutrulli for a while, then we feed into each other's courses, we're familiar with what we're all teaching. But also we do know each other, some of us better than others, in different formats. So for those of you watching, myself and Terence are both based at the London campus at ESCP Business School. So we're close colleagues in certain margins. So I'd be very interested actually to understand your answer to this question, Terence, which is, how do you think Cutrulli students differ from other students that you encounter in other business schools that you teach for? What makes Cutrulli students unique?
I think there are a couple of things, right, that makes them very, very different from the other students who I've come across before. And one is, I think they're fun to work with. I actually enjoy teaching and working, or sometimes making fun of them. But the idea is that they are very it's a very nice group to be working with, whether it is actually in Serbia or in Croatia. So that's one. Two is I find a lot of the time that they are quite eager in terms of what there are, in terms of the things that they're looking for something. They want to actually learn, and I think these two things are actually quite essential. Because it takes two to tango. We, as professors, we cannot really do our job if the students are not playing their role. And I think, to me, at Cutrulli, one of the things that I appreciate a lot is the fact that I actually get a lot of reactions and responses from the students, a lot of interactions with them, and that makes it not just a lot easier to actually convey the messages that I want to convey, but also make it much easier for me to create a flow. And making sure that we actually have an enjoyable experience along the way, because after all, sitting in the course, right, for 30 hours, 3 days, it's in my case 4 days, in finance, and it's not always fun. So I really appreciate that aspect, of Cutrulli students.
Could I bring Chris in as well at this point? Chris, do you have any perspective in terms of how you view Cutrulli students relative to other students that you're exposed to?
Okay, well, I think I would have to agree on the comments about the energy levels in the room. there's a certain level of noise that can be generated fairly easily, and that might be a regional thing. There might be another. I don't know quite what the exactly what the cause is, but this is a group that has an eagerness about it, and an energy to progress things, and above all, I think also to kind of understand how things will be applied. It's a very applied group, and that's partly a reflection perhaps of people's educational backgrounds, which in the region, a lot of people are coming to this from technical backgrounds, engineering backgrounds, as well as other things. But there's quite a lot of how do we make this work, and a willingness to try new things and to find out new things. Some of that is a little bit naive sometimes, and I agree with Terence. It's good fun to have fun with that. But you can't fault the energy. So that's the thing that usually strikes me, especially because I get people on day one when there's a lot of nervous energy in the room, actually, that needs to be dissipated in order for the whole group to realize that everybody's on their own journey. Nobody's judging anybody else. You've all got to decide for yourselves what you want out of this, and who you are and where you're going, and that it's good from that point of view. Yeah, that would be perhaps one of the observations. I don't know if it's particularly different. I mean, I pick up on something that Nicholas was saying earlier about why on earth is the MBA so durable, given the way that fads come and fads go. Things change, reputations arise and reputations go, but the MBA seems to have endured in one way or another around the world. And I think it's sad to say, since we're all people who deliver content, it really isn't the content that matters, because the content, although important, will obviously fade. You can't retain hundreds of hours of learning and knowledge, and that is sometimes a shock for people on the program, to realize that this isn't really about memorizing stuff or having things transmitted into you so that you never lose your memory of what a subject was. So it's important, but that's not it. That's really not why MBAs work. And I think it's to do with creating a space, a safe and supported, facilitated space for people to understand what their managerial identity is. And for that, you need the content, yes, and you need the confidence, and you need the awareness, and you need a lot of things that are structurally on the program. But the really big reason why it works and why it's worth doing, and it's a long and tough journey to get through a program like this, but it's worth it because you understand much more who you are and who others are, and this idea of getting the benefit. Everybody says, and it's a cliche, that the value of the program is the people sitting around you, and you don't really understand what that means at first, but over time, gradually, more and more, you begin to get it, that the learning is an interactive process, and there's so much you can gain, because what an MBA can't do, an MBA can't substitute work experience. So applying what you're doing while you're studying is invaluable. To bring the experience into the room is what it needs. And then when you've got a diverse group, which is the other thing you don't normally get outside an MBA, is the diversity of backgrounds, structures, functionalities, characters and personalities. If you're open to all of that, it can be a really life-changing experience. And it's not about the academic part. It's not about the ticking the boxes and passing the exams, although you have to do that. There's some other quality there. That's a long-winded answer. I don't even know if it was to a question that was asked. But
no, it wasn't. I think you've totally spot on to point out that it's the class is greater than the sum of its parts, and it's because of those experiences that students share in the classroom that, as educators, we attempt to facilitate, and we try and facilitate that with specific concepts from our different disciplines. But it's ultimately the network that's generated within the students of the same generation, as they meet each other kind of month to month throughout the program, and they get the opportunity to apply concepts and then come back to each other and to discuss how that goes and develop together. But then also there's the wider network as well, which is, so Nicholas mentioned before about the network and the alumni and the value of the degree in that respect. And I remember when I first started at Katruli, and it seemed like every time I was teaching every time I was in Belgrade or Zagreb to teach a course, there was some kind of alumni event on that I was invited to go out for some dinner and some sort of event where the present generation of students would be invited, but also the previous alumni as a networking event. And it took me a long time to try and recognize that that doesn't come at the expense of being up and alert at 9 o'clock the next morning to learn about quantitative methods or economics. But in fact, that really is the value of the degree, is being part of that network and being able to share those experiences together. So it can be quite humbling sometimes as instructors to realize that you know, the theoretical concepts that we're teaching and the books that we're recommending students read, that can be replicated just by sitting at home reading a book, or even these days getting some access to online degrees. But it's that shared experience of being in the classroom, being plugged into a network of alumni that can only be delivered in a situation like Katruli. Maybe if we go into a little bit more depth about individual courses at this point, that might be interesting for people to hear a little bit more about. If I come around the table and ask you to just give some more, you know, if you put yourself in the shoes of a prospective student who's kind of just wondering what the format is, not only just the content of the course, but also how they would learn, the atmosphere within the classroom, how much work they'll be putting in, how much of it's lecture based or group work or anything like that. Maybe if I come to Nicholas first, could you just give us a bit of an insight as to how that works on a kind of practical basis?
Sure. I have to elaborate a bit on the 2 different courses or 3 different courses I'm teaching eventually there. So briefly, or in a nutshell, if we take the strategic management course, what we try to do there is to discuss all the different ways companies got today to put together a winning strategy. So we go for all the way from the conventional strategic planning processes, you know, the ones that we've learned for the last couple of decades with people like Michael Porter, Peter Drucker, those initial gurus about strategic planning processes, which actually gave us a lot of concepts and tools that in many situations still hold true today. We can still use today. But then we move also into digital business models and platform business models, all the way, you know, the new things that companies are finding now to put together a strategy that actually copes better with a fast-paced, fast-changing environment. In the middle, we also touch innovation, some concepts of innovation with blue ocean strategies that could be, I would say, always could be like a midway between the conventional way of doing a strategy and the digital or the latest concepts today. In the middle, you got also the blue ocean strategy. And as I always stress, there is no better or worse approach. There is just an optimal or suboptimal one, because you got companies like McDonald's still today doing division of labor, as you know, it was introduced at the beginning of the last century, and they are the largest fast food chain in the world, still doing division of labor, as Frederick Taylor in 1905, 1903 actually taught us to do. So it's not that because it's old or traditional doesn't help you, but of course we have to look forward and see what's coming and try to explore new ways of connecting with the stakeholders, as we call them. That would be the strategic management course. In the strategic marketing course, of course, we go more into the specifics of how to create customer value. So we go through 3 days. In the first one, we do strategic marketing, talking about concepts as positioning and market segmentation and understanding today this changing profile of consumers. It's not that easy to identify the groups that people belong to now, because the variables they use in the past to define their own identities have been changing. I don't want to elaborate on many of these things, but if you pick gender today, then you really got a tougher time that used to be in the past, because you could classify people much easier than you can do it today. So we discuss these bigger pictures in the first day, then we move into tactical marketing decisions the second day. And of course, we talk about digital marketing as well. We talk about marketing communication, pricing strategies, promotion, how to design a winning product, and eventually how to deliver. And the third day, we talk about branding, because to me, that's the single most important asset. And I'm going to fight with some of you probably on this, but don't take it personal. But I think in the long term, that's one of the key assets. If you don't want to allow me to say that it's the most important, but branding, it's definitely something that you need to understand why you need it, how to develop a brand, how to curate a brand, how to manage your brand in the long term. So that would be the third day. And in the marketing course, by the way, we use also a simulation game, because as many of you have mentioned, the practical approach, it's what actually, students really want to have in terms of, you want the concepts, you want the theory, you want to understand why it works like that, but then you also want to put your hands on it and see how it works in reality when you do it. So it's like a lab. We somehow try things in the course and see how it works before we do it in reality. The last course, the simulation course, it's a global business simulation. People have to run a global company with operations in 3 different continents, and they have to put together basically all what you guys and me and all the other profs have been training them for. So from logistics and supply chain, the human factor, sales and marketing, strategy, finance, accounting, taxation, all the aspects come together. It's a pretty exciting game. No one wanna, usually lose the game. Everyone get out the child that they have inside. So it's a pretty exciting game, and it's fun, but it's also an interesting way to see how a global company in a simulated environment actually works. So that would be more or less from my side.
Brilliant. Thank you. Terence, now you do a 4-day finance course. Can you just tell us, there might be some people that are a little bit apprehensive about that. They might not think that's the best idea of how they want to spend 4 days of their life in a classroom learning finance. Do students survive that course?
Mostly, but then none of them actually come out really unscathed anyway. It is actually a torment, because 4 days in a subject on finance, and by definition, finance is a very, very dry subject. Unlike, for instance, strategy, or even fundamentals of management, because there are just so much to cover. Yet in this case, you're looking at something that is just one narrow function, if you like, and 2, it's a very, very technical subject. It requires you to do a lot of calculations, going over the same thing again and again. So the way I usually do the 4 days is knowing very well that you can't actually get anyone to sit through a 4-day finance course, right? You have to actually break it up and use different different techniques to cover it. So I would usually do about 60% of talking, and then there will be quite a number of small exercises, just to be because most of the students here we're talking about, they're actually EMBA or MBA or even EMBA. In the reality, how many of them actually need to do the actual calculations? It's there are very, very few of them. Not even those who are actually working in the finance function, because there's always someone who will be able to do it for them. But so my job is not to actually get them to be able to roll up the sleeves and actually build a model. My job is to actually allow them to develop the financial literacy to the extent that they can actually understand and interpret the work carried out by the others. So it is the remaining 40% would actually be made up of a little bit like a spreadsheet modeling, right? I always remember this this analogy. If you ever buy a franchise at McDonald's franchise, one of the things that McDonald's would ask you to do, even though you're putting in $1 million, and that was a long time ago, to actually pick up the franchise, they forced you to actually work and flip burgers in the kitchen. for 2 years. They've even though you are the franchisee, you actually bought it. And so I asked the question, why do you want to force people to go into the kitchen to flip burgers? The answer is, it is the only way to train that person or the investor to actually know inside out how things are actually coming in, and what do you need to do, what kind of process you need to take in order to actually produce the outcome. Same thing here. I like to actually get my students to start do the work that usually they don't usually do. Roll up the sleeves and actually do it. And this is a lot going back to your earlier question, Anthony. Even finance people because they have been doing this without actually going really in depth. A lot of them actually struggle. With the most basic things. But the idea is simple. It's not to train them. We're not here to pretend that, with a spreadsheet or two, you'll be able to do financial modeling. The key is you would know what type of things that people could be doing to financial modeling that can actually change the outcome. And so it is a mixture of, theory, and concepts and practice. In our case, it's not that much theory, because in finance, a financial theory mostly are actually put in use. One thing I also want to mention is that we would you know what? I completely forgot. I actually got carried away. So, yeah, no, actually, I remember. One of the things that, I think, going forward, with the coronavirus situation, is that at least in the financial landscape, all right, when it comes to businesses, because lots of governments around the world, they have been pumping money into the markets, into the economy. And companies are as a result, are either looking for cash or they are trying to build up their war chest. The fact is that I think going from the next class onwards, I think when it comes to teaching finance, it will be a rather different things. Simply because it's almost like the default setup in the past has been completely changed. There is a radical shift. Someone actually literally put a carpet under our feet. So it is going to be a very interesting time when it comes to looking at how finance work. And I think in the past, what I have been doing in my 2 finance courses is that I will make sure that there is always several hours dedicated to really discussing what is really happening, in the more macroeconomic terms, in the financial landscapes. I remember doing a very quick discussions on fintech, because that is another aspect. Nicholas was talking about technologies, the digital business models. It's basically spreading everywhere, and how is it really changing the financial landscapes, right? So it makes it is a very very, very exciting course. If you can actually endure it. But yeah, so I hope somehow I shed some light as to how I would approach, how I have been approaching the my finance courses.
Thank you. I think a lot of people, a lot of potential students, can be somewhat daunted by finance, but then I think there's one thing to think about, which is how finance will change, following coronavirus, and once businesses start opening up and pandemic being over. But one thing I often stress to students is, in terms of those kind of really big risks that economies face, we're seeing now the impact of a pandemic and the extent to which countries were prepared for that, and whether or not we need to spend a little bit more time thinking about these kind of big global risks. But one of the biggest global risks that have been on the top of people's lists for years and years is financial instability. And I think one of the reasons why people are a bit daunted by finance is because sometimes people might be a bit worried about it. But for every business leader, financial instability is one of the biggest risks they face. And so you cannot ignore getting into the detail of a company's financial picture, the principles of finance that then apply for a national level as well. There's a very close link to the macroeconomics that I teach, where we think about currency risks and financial instability and things like that. So all of these things do loop together. And you can't be a modern business leader with your head in the sand thinking about, well, there may be some risks, but I'll just figure somebody else in the organization is going to have better expertise than I do, because we're seeing now how all of these things link to each other and how leaders need to be able to see, have a picture of everything.
Yep.
Maybe if we come to Chris now, could you just talk us through a little bit about the way in which your course is run, maybe also a bit about assessment methods as well, how students are assessed, how they spend their time in the classroom with you?
Yeah, although just actually to back up the point you just made, because it's so important that everything is interconnected. Business is divided into these silos within businesses and also within an MBA program, but the reality of life, as everybody knows, is that everything is connected with everything else. And that overview, that understanding and that fluency is something that you begin to develop on an MBA program. You'll never, the point is not to have everything sorted by the time you graduate, but to be able to go back into your organization or go to another organization with a much more educated pair of eyes and actually a more educated pair of ears, which is one of the things that the first module is also about. That's my segue. So I'm kind of the warm-up act for Anthony, I think. I always feel that way. Mine is the first 3 days of the program, and there are a number of things that it's a lot more interactive and experiential, I think, than a lot of people who are coming from perhaps a more traditional education or even a training background in the region. It's not quite what they're expecting. They're expecting to be marched into a room, sat down at a desk, and someone's going to lecture at them for a while, which isn't what happens on, I think, any MBA program anymore, but it's certainly not what, as you can see, it's not how the faculty here like to arrange things. So the first thing that happens on the 3 days is that we have to kind of break the ice and dissipate the nervousness and find out who's in the room, because of the importance of later on in the course of understanding the value of the experience and the education and the personalities of other people on the program. Well, that's the first thing that we're gonna work on, to break down any sense of people feeling that they're not really up to it, or they're not worthy of being there, and all of these sorts of things. So there's a kind of a social part we begin with. The second thing is to then, once you've got people feeling very comfortable, is to make them feel very uncomfortable in the room, which is to get them to question some of their assumptions, because it isn't a training. It should be an education, and the key to education is that you sharpen your critical abilities. You're not just taking it in. You're not just accepting what you're being told, or what other people are telling you, or even what you're telling yourself. So we spend a bit of time setting up situations on day one where there is some confusion and there is some ambiguity, and therefore there is some uncertainty, and not giving answers, not coming up with the formula. So a lot of the first day is not what people normally expect, but it's tremendous fun. And like all your MBA days, they're long and they're tiring, and it's absolutely worth it in the evening when you can go out and have a drink and kind of let your brain do its processing. There are some other themes in the first workshop too that are important. One of those is group work, teamwork, and generally speaking, you'll be doing quite a lot of interaction around working with materials in a group, or responding to business questions as a team, and not necessarily having those teams in competition with each other. That's not necessarily the thing at all. It's more to make the interaction more efficient and more effective. And the third thing, which we get to on the second and third day, and this links to this question of assessment, is to preview. So the opening module is sort of a preview of what's coming. What's the scope of an MBA program? What are the kinds of things you might typically you might typically be studying in the future in very general terms, but the specific part of that is what attitude do you take into those modules? What does it mean to arrive as a critical thinker, so that you ask the right questions? So the other theme in the starter workshop, or the foundations of management, is the all important ability of a leader or a manager to ask the right question. And a lot of that comes from the key skill of listening. So all of these are parts that appear on the first 3 days, and it doesn't matter if it's not all retained, because it's somewhere, it's there in the room anyway, and it will come out, it will repeat. The MBA rhymes all the way through, and until you get to the point where you suddenly realize your thinking has changed and you can't remember the moment at which that switch happened. But suddenly you realize, no, I don't see things quite the same way anymore. The assessment that we do at the start is split. So there's a little bit of in-class assessment, and in Foundations of Management, that's a piece of group work with a presentation, but it's not one of those awful everybody has to stand up in front of everybody else type of presentations. It's a little bit more supportive. It's a bit more integrated into the class. And on day 3, the different groups that are formed work together to present and teach. Actually, they're doing a bit of teaching for everybody else on all of the other subjects, not all of the other subjects on the MBA program, but many of the modules, the other modules, including strategy, marketing, finance, and the economics. So yeah, I'm kind of getting them to do a little bit of a warm up. The other piece of assessment that they do is some writing, an assignment that you write after the workshop is over, and it's a little bit of practice of analysis. So you're asked to go back to your organization, from a list of questions, pick one which is relevant, and offer a very brief and opening analysis of that question in your organization, with no high expectation that you're going to solve anything or sort anything out. It's just practicing, it's sharpening the knife. And the other part, the last part, is a personal reflection, because that's also my subject area where I teach in the UK, which is understanding yourself, developing your own self-awareness, and giving you some tools for that. So a lot is packed in. But I hope that it's done in a fast-moving and interactive way, because I would love to model, or to believe that that's the model for the energy and the attitude that you need to go through the rest of the Katrugli program with. And I think it is. I think it does. So that's its design.
It's interesting because I do follow on from you. So I get the benefit of the students just after they've had your course, and often when I ask them what have you covered, and just try and get a feel for their feedback, I think the most overriding sense is that they're really rethinking things, and they're looking at things with a different perspective, and their instinct there at that point is almost to want to kind of just slow down and to take that all on board. And then I'm coming along with some economic concepts and delivering my course. And you feel like that from the perspective of participants, it's that recognition that's the module, that's what they're going to be doing for the entire duration of the program. Is they're going to be adhering to lots of different perspectives. They're going to be applying it in different ways. Their brain is going to be working quicker. They're going to be thinking more. They're going to be reading more outside of the course itself, and trying to integrate that with their workplace. All of the experiences they're having in the workplace, they're going to now be reassessing in light of the frameworks that they've been thinking in the program. And so that desire to maybe just kind of slow down and really think about it and reflect. Yeah. To some extent, you say, well, we're not going to have time to do that. We're now up and running. This is the standard that we're going to be at, and we're going to continue. Yeah.
Well, one of the diseases that people bring into an MBA program, especially sort of in the first half of their career, is this idea that everything is a problem to be solved. and that's the skill you need. And to a point, that's true, but it doesn't apply later in your career at all. It's much more subtle. Yeah. So absolutely, I'm glad to hear that. If they're confused when they get to you, yes.
And so maybe I'll just speak a little bit about the structure of my courses for potential students. So the managerial economics course on the executive MBA is a 4-day course, because that integrates business ethics, which was introduced this last year. So it's 2 days of economics, 2 days of business ethics. Both of those are heavily case-based. So there'll be some lecturing where I'll cover some of the key concepts that I think are important. Obviously for that duration of time, it can't be entirely lectures, and I think the students seem to like a variety of different teaching methods. So there'll be some lecture, there'll be some cases based on pre-readings that students do. And I think the main difference between Cutruli students and other students is that I always know that there will be a majority of students that have a sufficiently in-depth understanding of pre-readings that we can have a very good discussion about them. And whereas there may be some other institutions where I'm always looking to the same kind of few students to have done that previous work, at Cutruli you do get the sense that everybody's starting on the same page, and so you can really go in depth into the cases. And then also I like to use some games, some simulations or some mini exercises that we do in groups, and try to spread that. I think the assessment is quite similar across many programs. We tend to have a group element. So much of the courses are taught in groups. We like to assess students in group settings, and typically that's through some presentation that might take place during the module itself. And then often there'll be an individual exam or a reflective essay or assignment that typically is done once the course is finished, to give students time to go back over their notes and to apply some of those concepts. So for my managerial economics course, that's how it works. And that's been the case for some time. Just before I open up to Q&A, I was just wondering if I could just go once more back through the faculty and just say, if you had one kind of key piece of advice for prospective students, I'd be really interested just to know what that, it doesn't need to be a single piece, but just what your thoughts and reflections are of, sometimes it's a rare opportunity to be speaking. I like when I'm interviewing potential students, it can be a nice opportunity to get to people before they arrive in the classroom, and that can be quite beneficial sometimes. So I was just wondering what your key advice would be to potential students, and how you think they can get the most out of your course or out of their studies more generally. If I come to Terence first, what would your key advice be?
Simple. A lot of students who would come to my finance course, because they're not coming from the finance background, they tend to be like remain very silent, very quiet, because they believe that they've got nothing to contribute to. It's not true. The fact is that finance is a interdisciplinary function, right? There is always something that one can actually add on. So my advice to anyone who is joining the program is, regardless of what background you are coming in, you always have some valuable contribution that you can actually provide. Either it is to the group, whether it's to the group, to your group of friends, or to the course. There is in this new world, it is all about connecting ideas that were previously not serviced. So I would say, have the courage, contribute.
Thank you. How about you, Chris?
I think I'd have a couple of things. The first is because mine's right at the beginning, so I'm kind of putting my head in, trying to get into the head of before you start, and it would be to ask yourself, if I don't do this, what would I do? It's important that you understand and get a feeling for what progression will mean for you. What do you want out of this? And to have thought about whether this is the best way to do this or not. So a little bit of critical thinking for yourself. What assumptions have you made about this? And the second is, absolutely make sure that you speak to someone who's done this course. Don't listen to us. Listen to those who have completed or are about to complete and finish. And what do they say about it?
And that's very good advice. And so those of you that are considering it, if you do have people within your network, if you looked on LinkedIn and you know people who've been through the program, there's certainly no one better to talk to about the expectations and experiences of people that have been through it. Nicholas, do you have any advice?
Yeah, I could say basically two things. The first one, building on Terrence's concept. I always open the course telling people, you know, you've been picked to be part of the program because of your contribution, what you can bring to the class, because your profile. So it is true that it's your right to be there and to absorb knowledge from your colleagues, but it's also your duty to share your knowledge with your colleagues equally. Okay, so it's important that you come to the class well prepared and ready to share. That's what you're there for as well, not just to absorb passively. And the other thing, it's maybe something that somehow Chris mentioned, come with an openness to question yourself, be ready to question your assumptions, the way you see the world, the way you see yourself. You know, that's actually from the very beginning in Chris' module. So come with an open mind, because that's the only way you can really absorb different viewpoints and diversity. And that's exactly what it's going to enrich your, not just your managerial decision processes, but also it's going to enrich you as a person, making life decisions down the road as well.
Brilliant, thank you. So we will turn to some Q&A now. So I can see there's a question that's already been asked, which I'll answer, and then I'll encourage anybody that's participating either to type in questions or flag that you'd like to jump in. So Nedco says, do you have any kind of statistics about the total effort in class, travels, homeworks for the EMBA program? So I think it can be very difficult to quantify the effort, and that may be different depending on different modules. I think the general rule of thumb is that most modules are 3 days, so Friday to Sunday, and they're intensive. You know, 9 o'clock starts and sometimes 7 o'clock or later finishes. So the bulk of the in-class tuition are those once a month 3-day courses typically. In advance of each course, there will be a number of cases to read and work to do in preparation of that. And then following most of those courses, there'll be an exam as well, which will be typically a take-home online exam, which will be around a month after the module has finished. Now there's different ways in which we can try and add up how much effort is involved in doing those things. What we typically find is that if you have an attitude, I think, of being at school or university where you're thinking about study time, then what you gradually realize is that a lot of the time commitment that you put into the program is in things like group work and group collaboration in and around the modules. And there can be quite a kind of a porous link between what you'd consider to be your group work and your kind of, general learnings and education. So I think ideally when this is working very effectively, you'll be putting in quite a lot of effort, but it won't always feel like effort because it won't always be, sitting at a desk, remembering facts and figures. Most of it is going to be collaborative, and it's going to be similar to work that you're already doing as part of your program. You'll be applying concepts to your workplace, and it will very much tie in with what you're doing in your careers. Ivana has a question here, which is how much teamwork is there during the program? So again, I guess this can differ slightly by different modules, but the MBA program typically are group focused. So most of the modules, students are going to be sitting in groups, and then most of the assignments that are done during the 3 days will be done in groups. I think, does anybody else want to jump in on any of those points? Yeah, sure, Chris.
I think it's probably fairly typical to expect that over a 3-day period, yes, there'll be some organized group work, but also there'll be breakout that involves you working just with another person or with 2 or 3 people, or occasionally something that is plenary, that it really is, it's just the whole group involved in it. So I think we all try to respect the fact that going at one pace, in one style, in one mode, over a whole subject, a whole module is unsustainable. And actually there are some moments when you just need to be left alone and do a little bit of thinking, or take some time out and reflect on things. So I think we all are very conscious of how difficult it is to sit there and just sit there and just sit there, and we all compensate by breaking things up. So I think you can expect the unexpected when it comes to this.
That's a good way to put it. There's a question here from Anna Petrovich, who asks, what happens if I cannot attend a certain module? So I hope you're not thinking about one of the 4 modules we've just been discussing here. And it depends. Is it that 4-day finance course that's in the back of? So if you can't attend a certain module, I think the general rule at Katruli is that there are 2. You're capable of missing 2 modules. So obviously, many people have work commitments or other personal matters that mean that they have difficulties attending certain modules on certain dates. So you're permitted to miss 2 modules, and you also have opportunities to catch up on those at later dates. You can go straight to exams. I think there's a penalty if you go straight to exam, but if you need to miss more than 2 modules, then there would be additional fees to be able to retake those modules. That's it in ordinary circumstances, but obviously in light of potential second wave of coronavirus, there's obviously going to be consideration. So, who knows whether next year modules will be able to be delivered on site as is traditionally done. So there may be future impacts on students' ability to attend. But of course, if it's something like a pandemic that affects all students, then the policy would be very different in those circumstances. And in the first instance, one option would be to move things online, as was done with some of the modules this year. But there's multiple options for that. But if it's an individual issue, if it's a clash with work commitments or something like that, then you need to let the program office know well in advance, and that could be managed. It happens that some students need to do that. Milena, what is the KPI of your courses? Is it salary of your students or amount of job opportunity? I think it would be a good idea for us to be incentivized based on student salary, maybe some kind of salary share model where when alumni get big pay rises having completed their studies, that finds its way back into the professor's pockets. That might be a good idea.
I mean, you can be double for my effort. I may even do better with my teaching with the right incentive.
What's your KPI, Terence?
My KPI is simple. The fact that you walk out of the class and you actually understand what people are talking about, like in a meeting when people mention, all these things about finance, EBITDA, like a profitability. Why is, what is it, why do we need to worry about interest payments? How much debt we have got, leverage? As long as you you have get the financial literacy, that basically really actually says that, I have done my job properly.
I think so. At the end of each module, students are given are asked to complete evaluations of the professors. So as instructors, as professors, the key measure of whether we're doing our job, in the short term, is those student evaluation forms. And the good thing about Katruli is there's no permanent tenured faculty. So Katruli avoids some of the problems that many business schools and universities have, which is that they have tenured faculty who are contractually obliged to teach modules, regardless of how they do so. And so Katruli, the student evaluations are looked at very closely. And then I certainly know as an instructor, if my student satisfaction scores are not very high, then there'll be questions raised, and that's something that I need to make sure that I can deliver on. Also, as a business school, you'll find that there's KPI kind of in addition to any individual course. So things like student salaries, things like job opportunities, looking at the alumni network, these are all things that Katruli looks at in terms of the cohort, in terms of looking at the program generally. But for us as individual faculty members, for our kind of courses, it'll be more focused on those student evaluation form surveys. And our own sense of understanding about what we're doing relative to our other experiences in other institutions. Another question here from Ivana, who says, can you tell us more about the business plan project? So the business plan project is something that all students participate in. It's a team project, and in theory, it's you know, it's a real project. So it's not schoolwork. It's a proper project where, as a team, you come up with some business plan idea. You create a sophisticated plan for that based on all of the content that you'll be exposed to from different modules during the program. The business plan project has a final presentation, so you'll be presenting that in front of a jury. And then the next steps of that are ideally some kind of a launch. So that's intended to be real, where, you know, there's real people involved who are interested in putting money into projects. And the hope and expectation is that many of those business plans become real. And we see evidence for that, whether that's through a new startup or whether it's somebody launching a new product line within their organization. So that's quite an exciting part of the course. And again, that's something where, when we think about KPI, you know, there's the kind of the internal measures that you might use within a business school to make sure that you're succeeding with what your objectives are. But there's also the external ones as well. And the easiest way to test the success of the business plan project is whether we can see those products on the marketplace for real. Now we've gone a little bit over our allotted time, so I'll just give one final request for any questions that any participants might have that haven't been answered. I think we've done a fairly good job. I think I've seen all of those questions, and there's nothing there that's been asked that hasn't been dealt with. So it just leaves me to thank all of the faculty members who've joined us today. I know that at these times there's a lot of requests of your time and a lot of Zoom calls, and people get a lot of Zoom fatigue, but I think it demonstrates a lot of the importance that we all feel for Cutruli, that we're more than happy to spend our time doing this today. But I wanted to thank you all for joining us and for your answers. They were very useful, very helpful. And it's a nice reminder as well that we're all working together to deliver programs for the students. And it's good to see you all. I hope you're all doing well. I also want to thank the participants for joining us today. Obviously, the whole purpose of the school and the program is a function of the quality of the students and what those students go on to do. As instructors, it's a privilege for us to be in a classroom where we have the opportunity to give you some content that we find interesting and think is interesting. But ultimately, the course is always what you make of it. And the value of the degree is the career achievements that come from the students rather than us instructors. So thank you for joining us today. I hope we've answered any questions that you might have. You should also know where to go if you've got follow-up questions within Cutruli. So please do take advantage of those opportunities. And I sincerely hope that we will see you in the classroom at some point. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.